Okay, we are live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest. His name is Vince Palamara. And if you're watching this on Rockfin, Rumble, or X, Twitter, you will see the cover to his new book. Full title is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas, The Secret Service, and the JFK Assassination. And his last name is spelled Palamara, so it's all A's, 4 A's in a row. And this is not his first book. As far as my research, I think he has 8 books under his wing. Some of the other titles are The Plot to Kill President Kennedy in Chicago and Other Traces of Conspiracy Leading to the Assassination of JFK. Also, A Coup in Camelot, Honest Answers about the Murder of President John F. Kennedy, Survivor's Guilt, The Secret Service, and the Failure to Protect President Kennedy. Also, JFK from Parkland to Bethesda, and the not so secret service, agency tales from FDR to the Kennedy assassination to the Reagan era, and then also Who's Who in the Secret Service. But he's just published this new book, and we're talking in the pre-show a little bit about JFK and the JFK releases this year and how much information was there. Maybe you can answer some questions regarding JFK and Secret Service in those files if there were any, but he can talk about more about that and his book. So Vince Palamara, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks a lot, William, and thanks to all your listeners and your watchers. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, one of my big topics is JFK. People are really interested in this subject. I've had other people regarding Ruth Payne. I've talked about just so many of these different characters involved. Dave Ferry. We did a recent one about a guy people may not know of, Thomas Arthur Valley, which I'm sure you know of. If you
definitely
applied in Chicago. Maybe you can talk about your background, how you got. I know that you've been involved in JFK research for quite a while. Maybe you can talk about how you got interested, your books, and then what led up to the publication of President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas.
Sure. Well, I'm 58, soon to be 59 soon. And at the age of 12, 1978, was the Haas-led committee, the second major investigation the government had of the assassination after the Warren Commission. And again, age 12, I was very much into the case. And it happened because my mom and dad were big fans of President Kennedy and also were touched by his assassination. So concurrent with all this, I was also a stamp and coin collector. Whenever I came across foreign stamps and coins that had President Kennedy on them, and I was actually fascinated so many foreign countries had his image on them, they would regale me stories about his life, his administration, and also, again, where they were when he was assassinated. I was just fascinated. I turned on the nightly news, and on PBS, they had the hearings about the Haas-led committee. And then this might seem a little bit out in left field, but there was another thing that was going on at the same time that had a definite effect on my future research, and that was reruns of a fictional show about the 19th century Secret Service called the Wild Wild West. So what happened was when I started getting into the JFK assassination, I became fascinated with the men around President Kennedy. Like as much as I was fascinated and interested in President Kennedy's life and death, I'd have a tendency when they showed newsreels, films, whatnot, I'd look past him and I started to see familiar faces around him. And so the years turned to decades. Really, people want to know when I really earnestly began primary research on the assassination would be around like 1990. And I went to a conference I'll make this very brief. In 1991, I had a major conference presentation, and there was people in the audience old enough to be my father, or in some cases my grandfather. And they said to me, "Wow, Vince, you know what? I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I never really paid attention to them before. Like they were like amazed. Like I was showing this Zapruder film, which a lot of them saw many times. And a lot of the people in the audience, seemed like everybody, had never noticed that Bill Greer, the driver of the president's car, turned back twice to look at Kennedy. So it was things like that. It was very inspiring. When I came home, I had a conversation with Dr. Cyril Wecht, the legendary,
on my show. Great guy. Unfortunately passed away recently.
Yeah, he's a legend. And he contacted me. He said, "Hey, I heard good things about you. You're a young kid, huh?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm 25. He says, "Well, I'll tell you what, have you talked to any of the Secret Service agents?" And I said, "No, actually, I only spoke to a couple of relatives." He says, "Maybe you should do that. See if you can find any of them." Keep in mind, this was largely before the internet was in existence for most people. There's computer bulletin boards. For the average person on the street never knew what the internet was. I certainly didn't at the time. So through directory assistance, newspaper archives, microfiche, whatnot, I started to find them. And and I ended up interviewing close to 80 former agents, the vast majority of the Kennedy detail years before Clint Hill and Gerald Blaine came out with their books. And again, making this very brief, this is not going to be a year by year thing, trust me, but just if people want to know, like, what was the one thing that really hit you? Like David Lifton was the Seibert and O'Neill report when he came across surgery of the head area, was his big coming out party, so to speak. We're like, wow, I know I'm onto something. Well, September 27th, 1992, I spoke to the head of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, B-E-H-N, again, number one agent Kennedy's detail. And up to that time, I begrudgingly believed some of the pablum, some of the, now that I know it's mythology, and some of the books like Manchester's Death of a President, Jim Bishop's The Day Kennedy was Shot, obviously the Warren Report, etc., that supposedly Kennedy didn't want certain security measures done. So even though I thought the Secret Service giving some stuff away here was lax, some things I thought, well, maybe President Kennedy didn't want certain things. So I broached the subject to him, and I said, you know what, I understand from reading the Warren Report and several books that President Kennedy didn't want your agents in the back of the car. He cut me off. He said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything on not having agents on the back of his limousine. If you look at the newsreels, you'll see agents on there. I became caught my flabbergasted. I couldn't believe my ears. The number one agent, not a buck private like Clint Hill and especially Gerald Blaine or the Kennedy detail years later. This was the number one agent, the field general. But what happened was when I got off the call, and my excitement went down a little bit because I said, this is really amazing stuff. But, somebody out there might say, very, very interesting, Vince, but it's one guy out of the wilderness. You got to get corroboration for this or maybe even debunk it. And what happened through the years, all through the 90s and even into the new millennium a little bit, when I spoke to these gentlemen, William, it was like they were reading cue cards. They were telling me the same thing over and over again. Oh, President Kennedy was a very nice man. He never interfered for actions at all. He never ordered us off the car. He never ordered the bubble top off. He never ordered the motorcycles away. I'm thinking to myself, well, my God, this goes against official history, because my big thing has always been, even though I believe there's a conspiracy, I waffled years ago, about 18 years ago. I briefly, begrudgingly went to the dark side, the lone nut side, but I kind of got my senses about me again, and I firmly believe there's a conspiracy. But my big thing has always been Oswald or no Oswald, conspiracy or no conspiracy. If these gentlemen would have done their normal professional, protective function, Kennedy lives, Kennedy survives Dallas. And all through my books, Survivor's Guilt, the first one, and up to including the seventh one. The Coon Camelot is a documentary I was on, but my seventh book is, President Kennedy Should Survive Dallas. And it's simply that. And it's this time, it's through the latest book. What it has different of the other six books is this is through the lens of the Secret Service books that have been written, where the other ones were through the lens, so to speak, of my own research, speaking to these gentlemen, corresponding with them. Now, that's still a very important part of this book, but it's through the lens of the Clint Hill books, major best-selling books on the number one book company in the world. Same with Gerald Blaine's The Kennedy Detail. And I actually analyze, review their books, and compare them to reality. Also, the Paul Landis book, The Final Witness. Carol Leonig, she's a multi-Pulitzer Prize winning author. She came out with a major book a few years ago called Zero Fail about the Secret Service, and I talk about that. So that's a good way of rounding up. That's where I kind of sit at right now. And interest in the case is really amazing right now. The Luna hearings, the file releases. So, yeah, something else.
It's really something else. It's never going to go away. There's actually, in my mind, I've talked to so many other researchers, great researchers. There's a history of the JFK assassination research. So there's a history of the history as things unfold and are exposed, revealed, and people find truths. And there's really active. One of the things about the Luna hearings and the releases, like there's active mis and disinformation, sophisticated stuff out there, like Macmillan and some of these other, like Lee and Marina. This whole book, like in these new things, she's CIA affiliated. It's really incredible. So there's a lot of things working against you. So this kind of recitation you're talking about of the Secret Service agents saying the same thing is somewhat telling. But I mean, it is interesting. I had no idea that there were so many books by the Secret Service agents. Maybe you can talk about their names and their books. And
sure. Yeah. Well, I'm sure most people know of the agent who jumped on the back of the car after the shooting began. Actually, it was pretty much over. And it's a Zapruder film. That's Clint Hill. He was assigned to Jacqueline Kennedy, and he wrote a book called Mrs. Kennedy and Me, and he actually ended up writing 3 other books. But I'd say his other book, Five Presidents, was pretty good too. Although there's things I disagree with, the assassination sections of his books. And the other one was Gerald Blaine of the Kennedy Detail. And his was actually the first one. All those books I just mentioned were co-authored by Lisa McCubbin, who later became Lisa McCubbin Hill, Clint Hill's wife. The thing is, what boils down to, I tell people, and people can see from my books, and they say, boy, Vince, you're right about this. The books never would have been written if it wasn't for my research. Literally, and my first book came out in 2013, but it was a self-published affair for years, basically since the mid-90s. And what happened was I had a heavy presence online. I still do now, even more so. But back in like the late 90s through the millennium, again, this presence will become important. I sent a 22-page letter to Clint Hill, and Clint Hill had an unlisted address and phone number. People have to keep in mind he was not easily accessible. The exact opposite. When you have an unlisted address and phone number, it's basically the end of the ball game. And no private researcher ever spoke to him before. He spoke to Mike Wallace at CBS. He spoke to the Warren Commission, but that was basically it for the most part. And what happened was, through the years of contacting these gentlemen, these former agents, a lot of them were very nice and said, hey, Bob Lilly lives in Niceville, Florida, and this agent lived here. And this one agent, Lynn Meredith, who his primary function was protecting the Kennedy children, he said, hey, Vince, with your interest, I think that you should contact Clint Hill. Here's his private address and phone number. I almost fell over. Wow, this is like the holy grail. Clint Hill, I'm going to get his address and phone number. So what I did was very bold. The summer of 2005, I sent him a 22-page letter. It was like a Cliff Notes version of my first book, basically laying out that, sir, with all due respect to you, I know at least you tried, but your colleagues basically handicapped you, and they're telling me, all these agents, all your colleagues are telling me that President Kennedy never ordered you guys off the car, didn't order the bubble top off, didn't order the motorcycles away, all this pablum they blame on Kennedy, like a blame the victim thing. And I sent a letter to him. It was signed, receipt requested, with a self-addressed stamped envelope in it, everything. And I sent it. I got his receipt. I got his autograph that he got it. Didn't hear anything from him, but I was like, well, I don't think he's going to actually put it in writing what he thinks about it. So in the interim, I spoke to his, turned out to be a very good friend for like 50 years, Gerald Blaine, Blaine, of the Kennedy Detail Fund Future. The books weren't written yet. And he was quoting from my letter to Clint Hill, my private letter. He was saying things like, well, don't get too hard on Agent Emery Roberts. He probably had Jack Reddy's life at stake, blah, blah, blah. Well, I took the initiative then to call Clint Hill, and I want to know what he had to think about it. And he says, about what? Yeah, I received a letter. I don't want to talk about it. I have no interest in talking to you. And I thought that was going to be the end of it. Like, wow, at least I tried, and this, that, and the other. And obviously Gerald Blaine got my letter too. Well, then in the trade papers that same year, 2005, I get this unbelievable. Simon & Schuster is the biggest book company in the world. They're going to come out with a first-time author, Gerald Blaine, this obscure agent, this book called Kennedy Detail. Then I get a signed, registered letter from Gerald Blaine's attorney telling me to take down my blog that mentions his name. Like, what? Then I turn on C-SPAN, and there's Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill, former agents with CEO Brian Lamb, speaking about me and showing a video of me from YouTube. Wow. They're saying this gentleman, Vince Palamara, a Duquesne University graduate from Pittsburgh. I don't know him. And do you know him? And they both said, yeah, they knew of me. And when they were shaking their head, disgusted looking face, showed the video of me speaking. And they both laid into me for about 5-10 minutes. And the thing is, what people were saying, like, wow, Vince, thou protest too much. I mean, this is the time my first book was even out other than self-published form. And Joe Q. Citizen didn't really know who I was at all. And it's like, why are these guys going on about you? And then before you can catch your breath, 2 years later, Clint Hill's on C-SPAN again. They bring me up again. The gentleman we spoke about the last time. And in the midst of talking about Jacqueline Kennedy, the children, James Rowley, the chief of Secret Service, they mentioned me. And I knew that I was on to something. And again, the letter from Gerald Blaine's attorney. And then I ended up coming out. Well, he came out with his book in 2010 called The Kennedy Detail. And it was a real blame the victim thing. That's why I eventually started critiquing his books. And that's why the new book is out now, President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. It's an antidote to his book. Because what he does, he basically blames President Kennedy. He basically says Oswald acted alone and Kennedy helped him set up his own target because he didn't want us on the back of the car. He didn't want the bubble top. He didn't want the motorcycle. I see what happened. It created this, again, it got everybody off the ball, William. It made everybody think that, wow, it's a shame what happened, conspiracy or no conspiracy. But, President Kennedy kind of had to come in, and he didn't want certain things done.
It's easy to blame him, too, because he's passed away. Like, it's perfect.
Exactly. And
it's like the scene out of Schindler's List where they're like in the concentration camp, and they're like, who did it? And the guy points, and the guy's already dead. Sorry.
Good analogy. I like that. Yeah. And so what happened was, I know I ruffled feathers because that summer 2013, Lisa McCubbin rates my not even released book a 1 star on Goodreads. Gerald Blaine has my book to read on Goodreads. And then when the book first came out, first day, Chuck Zaboro, former Kennedy detail agent I spoke to, rated it a 1 star. It's like, boy, you must have read that book real quick. But the thing that really was galling, William, is that in 2013, 2014, I was harassed at work by, and I'm not going to name him for legal reasons. I mentioned it in the new book. A friend, a former military intelligence agent, a friend of Gerald Blaine's. And basically what it boils down to, I got called into the office twice. He wanted me fired for my unpatriotic writings about Gerald Blaine. So people think, oh, this is Get a Life. This is 50, 60 years old. This is old stuff. When it wasn't to them, it was a current event in their eyes. They were trying to get me terminated from my job at the time because of my unpatriotic writings. Now, the HR representative laughs, oh, Vince, you're okay. It's First Amendment. You didn't do anything wrong. And the CEO doesn't even read the letters. We screen them all. He sent it to the CEO of my company to get me fired. And again, you know what it was? It touched a nerve. And here's another thing about the year 2005. Okay, I wrote that 22-page letter to Clint Hill. And then all of a sudden, Gerald Blaine's writing a book called The Kennedy Detail. These guys were fly fishing in Colorado, long retired. They used to wear it as a badge of honor. I'll never write a book. No one of these guys will ever write a book. And then another thing happened in 2005. Clint Hill admitted on C-SPAN he burned all his notes that same year. I'm thinking, oh, is it after he got my 22-page letter and it freaked him out? Because he probably thought it was going to be a congressional investigation because he's getting this letter 22-page long of all the agents, all his colleagues telling him, oh, President Kennedy never interfered with us, never ordered us off the car, never did anything. And it's like, $64 million question. Why weren't you guys on or near the rear of the car during the assassination? Why wasn't the top on the car? And again, through my research, I found out that many times the bubble top was on the car. Roughly between a third and a half of all President Kennedy's motorcades, often in very good weather, he had the bubble top on. I spoke to Sam Kinney, who was the driver of the follow-up car. He told me that Sam, was solely responsible for the bubble top's removal. Kennedy had nothing to do with it. Kenny O'Donnell had nothing to do with it. It's been this big mythology, and it was his decision. He lived with it at the time, his early 90s, 30 years of regrets, whether it was the right decision or not. But the point being is they blamed that on Kennedy. Here was a guy that believed there was a conspiracy. One of the few agents I spoke to that believed there was one, Sam Kinney, who was nice enough, quote unquote, to take responsibility for him removing the bubble top. But if you read books and literature, you think, well, President Kennedy want that top on. It took years, William. I can't stress this enough. It's only been the last 5 to 15 years that so many films and photos have been released due to the photographer passing away, things going to public domain, things just being digitized or released or remastered. And because for years, even on Facebook, for years, you couldn't publish things that weren't your own photographs. They would take down your site and everything. Well, now because of Pinterest and so many sites, there's such a loose copyright law. So what's happened is it used to just be, we just had the inaugural motorcade and there's a Bruder film and very little in between. Well, now again, through all these years, I have it on my YouTube channel. It's 2.5 hours long. It's every known motorcade of President Kennedy, foreign and domestic. And you'll see many times the agents were in the back of the car. Many times the top was on the car. His limousine was going at a very fast rate normally. He normally had many motorcycles around the limousine as well. Yeah, there it is, the YouTube channel. You can go right there. It's on the main page. It's just down a little bit, and you'll see it's all President Kennedy's motorcades. And, a lot of other in fact, 90% of my channel is JFK related, assassination related, Secret Service related. And you'll see a lot of these films and photos and these men speaking and this, that, and the other. And so that's basically what it boils down to is that, they said that President Kennedy had a rendezvous with death. And it's like, well, wait, we all have a rendezvous with death. None of us are immortal, but it created a Shakespearean angle to his death. Like, he was reckless of his personal life and he was reckless with his security too. No truth to being reckless with his security. It's all big myth. Even his personal life has been exaggerated a little bit. I mean, there's some truth to it, but they really make it sound like he was betting a hooker every 5 seconds. There's been massive exaggeration on that score too. But basically that's what it boils down to. It's still a current event in my eyes because, that was 10 years ago now, the harassment I received to work in that. But, now Clint Hill just passed away in February. Gerald Blaine's very much alive. But as people will see, the very beginning of my new book, President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas, there's going to be 2 major films coming out. One's called Agent Number 9 on Clint Hill's life. The other one's Paul Landis' book. It was the name of his book. The film's called The Final Witness. So these guys, again, out there blaming President Kennedy, and these young schoolboys and even just, people, impressionable adults, it's a thing you're fighting because, they have a major publisher like that, Now, I've made a lot of headway with a lot of people. My researchers known, this, that, and the other. My own books, I've been in almost 200 other authors' books, page here and there and this, that, and the other. So I made some, inroads in that respect. But it's still an uphill battle. The 2 things I always get are, it's unbelievable. I always get almost on a weekly basis, Vince, I understand, the driver turned around and shot Kennedy. He didn't. The other thing I hear is, hey, I read this book. It said, President Kennedy didn't want the agents on the back of the car. And I have to tell them, all the agents I spoke to were there with Kennedy. They're not conspiracy theorists. They're not authors. They were there, and they said that President Kennedy never did that. And then again, I show them the films and photos of many trips. They're hanging on the handrails in the back of the car. They're running beside the car, right beside Kennedy, with a big ear-to-ear grin on his face. Again, it's all mythology, but it took many years of not only speaking to these gentlemen, but getting these films and photos released. Because without that, it was basically a guessing game. In the early 90s, when I was doing those presentations, a lot of it was secondary sources. So, yeah.
But that's why they can get away with it. I thought that there was a film where one of the Secret Service agents who was on the back of one of the cars got off and put his hands up, exasperated, why are you calling me off of this? Is that true?
That's it. Perfect one. Yeah, set up. Yeah. Back in 1991, I discovered that video and popularized it ever since. It was
it's on people can find it on my X thing because I put it up after the Secret Service event with Trump and Butler last
There
night.
you go. Yeah, this was them leaving Love Field, the airport in Dallas. It was 45 minutes before the assassination. And again, I discovered in the summer of 1991, I got a massive, then, keep in mind, VHS tapes was the thing in 1991. I spent a couple $100 on VHS tapes. What happened was, make this very brief, it was the fall of 1983 in the Dallas area, only in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, they aired unedited 16 hours or more of their initial coverage. They've never shown it since, other than little bits and pieces. In the midst of some very boring footage, to be honest, some good stuff and some boring stuff, it was like, wait a minute, what the heck is this? This agent, not once, not twice, but 3 times, raises his hands 3 times in disgust as he's called away. One of my 3 suspects is Emory Roberts, the shift leader of the White House detail, who was in charge of the other 7 agents in the fob car, 5 feet behind Kennedy's limousine. He stands up and waves him back, and that's when it turned out the agent's name was Don Lawton. And he raises his hand 3 times in disgust. There's actually another agent who doesn't appear in the black and white video, but he's in several black and white newsreels. Again, it's on my YouTube channel, Henry Ribka. For a long time, I conflated the 2 until about 8-10 years ago. I figured, oh my God, it's actually 2 agents. Henry Ribka is jogging with Don Lawton, and then he's relieved for some reason. He walks away. It must had to be Emory Roberts, because Emory Roberts, soon after, when Don Lawton's jogging with the limousine, that's when Emory Roberts stands up. Now, when I spoke to Don Lawton in 1995, I did not know he was the agent, but he did say, oh, we always had regrets, remorse. Who knows? If only they would have had agents on the back of the car that day in Dallas. So he even admitted that as much. But when he died in 2012, they did a little write-up in an obscure newspaper, I believe it was in Iowa. And a colleague of his said that Don always said, I should have been there. I should have been on the back of the car. And he rode on the back of the car 4 days before in Tampa and in March of 63 in Chicago, among other trips. So he wasn't needed for this Love Field duty. Some people try to say, Vince, he was assigned to Love Field. Even Paul Landis, to his credit, in his latest book from a couple years ago, even said that he never found that official story credible. So the bottom line is this video shows, pictures says 1,000 words. I've been showing this since the early 90s in conferences on the men who killed Kennedy. I was on part 7. I was on the coup in Camelot. I've shown this video. People are been really amazed that, wow, what is this agent doing? Just stand and discuss it. The thing, it takes a while to notice this, but after he's doing the 3 times raising his arms up, the universal sign of what gives. Well, Paul Landis, the agent on the running board nearest Kennedy, he takes his legs over the car and gets inside the fob car, leave a space for Don Lawton to get on, and Don Lawton doesn't take the invitation. And for a little while when the motorcade begins, there's no one on that side, okay, other than Jack Reddy, but no one, behind him, because Paul Lance got in the car. He was leaving the space for Don Lawton. So that's visual evidence right there. And it turns out Emory Roberts, not only did he recall 2 agents at Love Field, when the shooting began, he ordered the agents not to move. Kennedy wasn't dead yet. The first shot rang out, and he ordered the other men not to move. What happened was, this came about by a fluke. There's a statement in the book High Treason by Groden and Livingstone, and it says that Emory Roberts gave the order not to move. And I'm thinking, where's he getting this at? There's no source. So when I interviewed Sam Kenney 1 of 3 times, the driver of the fob car, again, 5 feet behind Kennedy, I asked him about, because Emory Roberts, sitting next to him, his supervisor, died in 1973. I said, is this true? And he goes, yes, exactly right. Exactly right. He goes, yeah, exactly right. Emory Roberts, he did do that. He ordered us not to move. And then he kind of hemmed on. I think he realized that, well, it doesn't sound good. So he was like, well, he probably was taking the other agent's life into consideration. He didn't want them run over if they would have jumped off the fob car. When I spoke to other agents, it sounded very lame at the time when he was telling me this. When I spoke to other agents, couple years later, they were telling me that doesn't ring true. We're there to cover and evacuate, or you're not there to worry about your own harm. If maybe anybody sees the Reagan assassination video the attempt, Agent Tim McCarthy raises his arm to take a bullet in the stomach. They're there to protect, to cover and evacuate, and to worry about their own hides is secondary. And especially, again, first shot or shots ring out, Emory Roberts orders the agents not to move. The assassination begins. Maybe that could be one of the reasons why Clint Hill was late getting onto the back of the car. Another reason he might have been late, he was one of the 9 agents that drank the morning of the assassination at Fort Worth at the Cellar Club and at the Fort Worth Press Club. But yeah, William, that's basically what it boiled down. I've been fighting so many myths, so many things I found out through research. And again, speaking to these guys and finding films and photos and going, my God. Yeah, no theories here. There's no conspiracy theories. It's all based on what these gentlemen told me and on actual documents, actual films. If they would have told me something else, the films and photos would have told me something else, then there wouldn't have been any books or been need to do any of this. But basically, that's what it all started with that conversation I had with the number 1 agent of Kennedy's detail in 92. And he told me, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying not having names on the back of the car. And all his colleagues were telling me the same thing. I'm thinking, my God, this is gold. This is dynamite. Because this goes against everything we've been told. I can't tell you how many people have told me that through the years. They don't even look at the secret service. Oh, Kennedy didn't want them on a car. So you just kind of figure, well, then, yeah, let's look at our suspects, which are very valid. Now, I'm not saying the Secret Service as an institution was involved in the assassination. I do have 3 suspects I think might have crossed the line, and all the other agents were just following orders. You know how that goes. So
absolutely. Yeah. Don't you think one of the suspects is the driver? Didn't you say he deliberately slows down at a certain ordained time?
Yes, he's one of them. I got to go through all 3 real quick. But Bill Greer, the driver of the president's car. Greer. And again, it came out in 1991. Harry Livingstone with High Treason and High Treason 2 and other books was there. Robert Cutler, George Michael Weaver, and they were all amazing. Vince, I never noticed it before. All the times I've seen the Zapruder film. Here's the sequence. First shot of shots ring got. Kennedy's reacting. He has his hands up next to his neck, and you can see the other people react in the car. Well, Greer looks back at Kennedy. Kellerman next to him, through his Born Christian testimony, when you can see in the film, gets the radio microphone and says, "Get out of line, we've been hit." And while Kellerman's on the radio microphone, Greer turns around again and is staring at Kennedy for a second time against his training, common sense, and the order from the superior to get out of line. Staring at Kennedy, the fatal shot makes its mark. No, Greer didn't shoot Kennedy. This big myth. They're looking at poor quality copies.
Bill Cooper's partially resple for that.
He's one. Him and Lars Hansen. Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know who's Lars Hansen. I don't know who that is.
He's the other one. It used to be a poor man's version of hard copy called not Inside Edition. It was something like along that line. But he got a lot of fame in the very early 90s, showing a very poor quality copy of the film on national TV, claiming it was Greer's forehead. And then Robert Groden was on it at counters. You can tell that's Kellerman's forehead, and they're claiming the bro cream in the sun on poor quality copies looks like a pistol, and it's not. In clear quality copies, you can see Greer's hands on the steering wheel. It's Kellerman's head. But the point is, what Greer did, as even people like Posner and Bugliosi admitted, he gave the assassin, whoever it was, Oswald or anybody, the easiest of 3 shots because he slowed down the car and didn't take evasive action and whatnot. And it gets even deeper than that. As horrible as that is, right there alone, that's why he's a suspect. But then it turns out, okay, Greer died in 1985. I spoke to his son, Richard, in 1991. And he was a nice enough gentleman. We're talking, and then there I said, "Hey, what did your father think of President Kennedy?" And he didn't say anything. It'd be like William if he asked me a question. I just stood there, I guess, like you
stay
okay?
silent, like a mob, like
Something
a
wrong?
mob person. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, I went back to it and I asked him again after he was answering everything else. I said, "Sir, what did your father think of President Kennedy?" And he said, "Well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic." And I'm like, whoa. And it really looms large, not only with Greer's actions and inactions, but two other major events happened. It's not the first, but I'll go out of order. The Irish Times in Ireland contacted me in 2013, the 50th anniversary of the assassination, because they knew my book was coming. In fact, actually, they just received my book, unbeknownst to me. Said, "Vince, it's got some amazing information for you. I don't know if you know because you're not in Ireland, but the entire Greer family were members of the Order of the Orange." Like, oh, they were, and that's like anti-Catholic as it gets. For in Ireland,
Northern Ireland. That's what they're battling about, right?
Yeah, Greer came to this country at the age of 18. He emigrated. He actually came via Canada to America, and he served as a chauffeur briefly in Boston. Actually, Boston for a couple years, actually, and he was also chauffeur for Henry Cabot Lodge, who was only a two-time opponent of Kennedy. He was later our ambassador to Saigon. This is all documented. It's not theory, whatnot. So you have that kind of weird background.
But people don't know. There used to be a lot more tension between Catholics and Protestants. Maybe it's still there ideologically, but my dad, they used to fight and brawl, and it was like real serious. Like,
you're right. And
here's not a joke.
Yeah, it's so true. So true. And the other thing is, major thing. The late 1990s, this came about again through research. I tried to collect every single book, even remotely related to the assassination. Of course, my research, I want to find anything Secret Service related, anything that could be of interest. And one of them was an obscure book called A Million Miles of Presidents by George McNally. He was a former Secret Service agent, and he was the head of the White House Communication Agency. He was on all the motorcades for Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. I think even into Nixon. But his book, he died in 1970. His widow came out with the book in 1982. It was like a Kinko's, FedEx, cut and paste type of deal where I guess she just printed up so many copies and whatnot. Well, here's the real amazing thing. In the course of this pretty dry book with no index, it's going along, the Truman years, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and then right before the assassination, he mentions in this book, one of President Kennedy's drivers, Thomas Shipman, died suddenly. I'm like, Thomas Shipman, Secret Service agent? Never heard of this guy. He died suddenly, and then the next couple paragraphs later talks about the assassination. What the heck is this? It took years to ferret out, but what it boils down, it's very, very much documented now, is Thomas Shipman, Secret Service agent driver Kennedy, he died of an alleged heart attack at Camp David on October 14th, 1963, a month before the assassination. Everybody talks about these mystery deaths after. This was a mystery death before. It allowed Greer to drive Kennedy in Dallas.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no lawyer's adage. Well, you probably heard this. Don't ever ask a question you know the answer to. If people look at the Chris Darden thing with the gloves and the OJ trial, that, and that. Well, what
famous
I did
trial adage,
whenever I contacted these men, I was flying blind because they all could have crushed my dream, so to speak. They all could have told me something else. Oh, go get a life, son. He did order us on the car, and they were telling me the opposite thing. Because I had no there would be no books if they would have told me something else. It is what it is. They told me what they told me. Thank God I got some of these guys on audio tape. I got them in writing it. And the other thing about Thomas Shipman was when I contacted his family, rather than throw a wet blanket on my research, they did the opposite. Again, going flying blind. They could have crushed my dream, said, oh, he had a heart ailment or something. No, they said for years, for generations now, they've also questioned it too. His daughter, Laura, said that he just passed an annual physical. How did he die of an alleged heart attack? And what was this about at Camp David? And there was no fanfare, and they were all mystified in a way that it gets even deeper. The Shipman family has relatives in Dallas. Thomas Shipman was specifically looking forward to the Texas trip in Dallas because they had relatives there. So he was going to hang out with relatives. Instead, he dies of an alleged heart attack. He was buried 2 days later. What it boils down, he dies. 2 days later, he's buried. There's an old country doctor adage because they don't do toxicology tests like they didn't in this case. Well, he wasn't shot or stabbed, so heart attack. And again, toxicology tests can sometimes take weeks, and he's buried 2 days later. And it's another amazing thing Laura Shipman, his daughter, threw out at me. She goes, well, yeah, Dr. Berkeley took care of everything for us. I'm like, what? Dr. Berkeley? You mean he was there for JFK. He was at the autopsy. He was at Parkland and whatnot. What's this about? He says, yeah, he took care of everything. That's the reason why he was quickly buried. And we always were wondered why, my father was quickly buried. And we were always wondering if he would have drove Kennedy because Greer, he stepped on the brakes and everything. We're like, oh my God. Because again, and they didn't want money. They didn't want fame. They didn't care about it. They went back into obscurity in Colorado. Again, they could have told me something else. They could have told me, get a life, hit a heart ailment instead. And I know for a fact these Secret Service agents have to be fit and fiddle, especially driver agents, because one false move, they're killing the president, maybe the first lady, maybe other dignitaries, spectators as they plow down people. They have a heart attack. No one's immortal. No one's infallible. But I'll just say the Secret Service agents got to be pretty darn close to the White House detail agents. And for him he's the only agent from Kennedy's detail that died during the Kennedy era. He's also the only person that died at Camp David. So that's the other thing.
One of the most secretive places in the world, by the way. That's why people go to Camp David. And for people who don't know, when Vince Foster died, there was a big meeting. I think Vince Foster was there at Camp David. And some people speculate that was where the decision was made. There was some kind of hardcore meeting about whether they were going to lie about something, and that started the dominoes. So that's what came to mind when you said Camp David. So,
another thing about Camp David, this came out in Mike Riley's book, Mike Riley of the Secret Service Who Protected FDR. Camp David was also known as the Shangri-La. During FDR days, they trained the OSS there, which was the precursor to the CIA. How about that? Pretty amazing. But the bottom line is, not only do we have Greer is weird feelings about Kennedy, his disobeying a direct order and common sense and training and turning around twice. He denies it to the Warren Commission. He said, I stepped on the gas. Well, it was after probably the second shot. He initially said he did see Kennedy to the FBI that night at the autopsy. Then he said that, I never saw inside of Kennedy. When you can see right in his bird room, he's looking at him. And the interesting thing about Greer was that day he was very remorseful. Powers and O'Donnell in their book, Johnny, We Hardly Knew You, talk about Greer was remorseful all day, saying if only I would have hit the gas or looked in time. And William Manchester, who interviewed Jacqueline Kennedy, one of the things in Manchester's book that is from Jacqueline Kennedy interview that still hasn't been released, talk about Bill Greer came up to me and said, Mrs. Kennedy, if only I had seen it in time, if only you hit the gas. But that night, when she's talking to Cyber O'Neill, Greer, he changes his tune and starts to blame Kennedy. The whole blame the victim thing was rampant on that night onward. So there was times the president ordered us to slow down. In other words, getting that in there that, Greer and about Kennedy and the blame the victim thing. And that's what happened. 6 months later, 6 months after the assassination, April of 1964, the Warren Commission was wondering, why weren't agents on or near the back of the car? What is up with this? And so 5 agents wrote reports, and I deal with them tremendously in my first book and off and on throughout my other books. And 5 agents basically say that, the Tampa trip, the trip before Kennedy ordered the agents off the car, when the films and photos came out, and it was a 28-mile motorcade, Kennedy's longest domestic motorcade, 3 times longer than the Dallas motorcade, they're on the back of the car the whole time. I spoke to Russell Groover, the Tampa, Florida lead motorcycle officer. Oh, yeah, they were on the back of the car the whole time, and they all denied there was any orders to take them off. Congressman Sam Gibbons of Florida, who rode a foot away from Kennedy in the limousine, he wrote to me in 2003 and said, I never heard any such order. President Kennedy was very happy. The agents were on the back of the car the whole time. See, William, it took decades for these films and photos to come out. So when you read in the Warren Report that on the Tampa trip, President Kennedy had ordered the agents off the car, you think, there's the end of the ballgame. I guess it has nothing to do with Dallas. It's the trip before. But what they try to do is use that as, there must have been some sort of standing order. If he didn't want him in Tampa, I guess he didn't want him in Dallas. There's no truth to this. And 2 of the agents who wrote the reports were Gerald Bain, head of the White House detail, who added to me that President Kennedy never ordered on the car. The other one was Floyd Boren, the number 2 agent, his direct assistant, who was in charge of planning the Texas trip, who is one of my other suspects because he's the agent who went around telling people. I mean, it gets a little convoluted, I understand, to a certain extent, but he's the agent who Clint Hill testified about during his Warren Commission testimony. He said, Floyd Boring, he told me, and I'm assuming he told other agents, that President Kennedy didn't want us there, and it had to do with the Tampa trip. Now, I wasn't on the Tampa trip, mind you, Clint Hill's talking about, but Floyd Boring evidently was told by President Kennedy not to be there, and I guess that's why we went there in Dallas. So he tried to make it like it was concurrent, like a standing order. No truth to this whatsoever. President Kennedy never ordered him off the car. When I spoke to Floyd Boring, he was another one of the agents that joined the chorus. Oh, President Kennedy never interfered with our actions. I beat him down on Tampa. I said, did he do it in Tampa at all? Even once? He said, oh, no, not at all. Where did you read that? I told, well, Death of a President. It quotes you. He quotes me? I was never interviewed for that book. Look at the source notes. There's no interview with Floyd Boring, but there's an interview with Gerald Blaine, who later wrote the Kennedy detail 40 years later or so. And basically, that's what it boils down to, William. There's this problem that they thrust on him. To be fair, there was 5 Secret Service. They must have been ordered by Raleigh when the Warren Commission was snooping around and wondering why agents were in the back of the car. And they wrote these reports. And they blamed it all. They made it sound like the Tampa trip is the trip before Dallas where Kennedy didn't want them on the back of the car. Not thinking this is before the internet, investigative journalism. It took little old me out in the wilderness to find these films and photos, to interview these gentlemen decades later. And I guarantee you one thing, if this would have been 1963, 64, and I would have even tried to talk to these guys, they would have told me to go fly a kite. They would have said no comment because they were active agents, number one, and They had a story to sell. It's only when they were in retirement and they're not thinking of cover stories, thinking about lying, and there's this young whippersnapper on the phone, they're all telling me what they're telling me. And it's like, geez, I'm thinking, hold on. We said, Vince, how do you keep your composure when they're telling you this stuff? It's like, well, it was tough because I so wanted to be combatant with them and said, do you realize that it was said something else was said different in 1964 the Warren Commission? But I was like, don't do it. Be friendly. Don't be combative. And that's basically what it boils down to, is this big smoke screen. So again, it looks really bad at first glance. They go, the Secret Service was involved in the assassination. I don't go that far. I think there was 3 agents: Bill Greer, the driver of the car; Floyd Boring was the planner of the Texas trip; and Emory Roberts was the shift leader, the leader of the agents in the car right behind Kennedy's. Those guys, I think, were the dirty agents, and everybody else is just following orders, falling into place. Emory Roberts is interesting for people that believe LBJ had something to do with it. I'm kind of agnostic about that. I think he was involved in the cover-up. Well, Emory Roberts switched to Johnson as soon as Kennedy was shot. Several authors noted that, including O'Donnell and Powers bitterly. Well, when they get to Parkland, Roberts turns to Kellerman, his own superior. Kellerman's ahead of him and says, you stay with Kennedy. I'm going to Johnson. Even bigger than that is that Emory Roberts became the appointment secretary for Lyndon Johnson while still an active agent. This has never happened in the history of the Secret Service from 1865 to the current day. You're supposed to be apolitical. You're not Democratic or Republican. It doesn't matter if you like the guy or not. You're there to protect the chief executive and put your feelings aside. Certainly not to work for the administration. And I reprinted these in my books. There's national newspaper articles where George Reedy, LBJ's press secretary, is being grilled by the press. Why is this Secret Service agent who's sitting in Dave Powers' office, why is he greeting the ambassador to Japan? And it turned out, again, he was an appointment secretary. What happened was, I found it out by a fluke when I was interviewing Sam Kinney, real nice guy. He was telling me also, he said, yeah, Emory Roberts, one of our own, became LBJ's appointment secretary. But I never saw that in writing or anything. So I thought, is he mistaken? That's weird. And it was only when I got these newspapers from newspaperarchives.com, I was like, my God, it made national news in 65. They were all wondering, well, when LBJ left the White House, he gave a farewell to the Secret Service. There's a transcript of it. And he calls Emory Roberts' name. He goes, Emory Roberts can't be here tonight. He greets me every morning and says goodbye to me every night. And that's the agent who ordered them not to move. That's the agent who ordered the 2 agents at Love Field to stand and desist and took over as soon as Kennedy was shot. There you go. In between that and the 9 agents who drank, they should have been fired from the Secret Service. But this was an innocent time. 9 agents drank the morning assassination, and Kennedy's head gets blown off. Instead, we're giving an award to Clint Hill. He should have been thrown in jail or stripped of his pension. Should have been congressional hearings instead. Oh, poor Clint Hill. But he's one of 9 agents who drank the morning up. And it's right there.
If you study Washington long enough, that's what happens when things go wrong. People get the opposite. They get promoted.
Yeah, he got 2 major promotions. He went from lowly agents to the head of the White House detail and assistant director. That's
how it's done. That's the level of intrigue in D.C., baby.
Yeah, and he wrote all those major best-selling books. He made millions. This is not hyperbole. Wow. He made millions of books because all 5 of his books, or I'm sorry, 4 of his books, sold 200 to 300,000 hard copies each. Cha-ching. Then you factor in he got movie rights, advanced movie rights. I killed his movie, by the way. There was another movie. It was going to be called The Kennedy Detail about Gerald Blaine's book, and Clint Hill wrote the foreword. And what the movie was going to be, I got the script of it. They were going to blame Kennedy throughout. They're going to use CGI technology and have the agents' heads the way they look back then, like in a Line of Fire movie, and superimpose it on actors from 2013, 2014. And they were going to blame Kennedy. The whole movie was just going to blame Kennedy for not being on the car and all that stuff. And I told the director, Steve Gyllenhaal, I got his private address. Thank you very much, from another person who helped me out. I said, sir, I hope before you do anything with this movie, I want to let you know. And I gave him all my information. The movie closed shop within 2 weeks. They had a major website with The Life of Pi and all these Oscar-winning people involved in it. All went away. It's all because of little old me. I got a hold of the director, and it went away. And I got this from
That's the guy who's the father of Jake Gyllenhaal, I think. Yeah.
Exactly right. And they were going to come out with this major movie. And when I got, well, it was a lady from the Philippines, real nice lady who was a friend of his, had his addresses. Oh, you got to write Steven. This is revolting, Vince. She contacted me out of the blue on Facebook, and it was all about Kennedy. And it was like, what's up with this lady? I was about to say, oh, this is ridiculous. Wait, you have Steve Gyllenhaal's email. Oh, yeah, I would love to write him. And then she goes, here's a part of his script, Vince. I got a pirated copy of his first script. And I'm like, this is just, I just want to tear my hair out. I can't believe, goddamn, this Hollywood movie is going to blame Kennedy for his own assassination, basically, saying that he set himself up by not wanting the top and the motorcycles around the car. And it was all going to be about this blame the victim crap. So when I sent it to Stephen Gyllenhaal, again, it is what it is. 2 weeks later, that he had this really expensive website. I can't put it's not hyperbole. You went saw his website. It's like, Jesus, how many hundreds of grand, how many millions they put into this thing? And you saw all the Oscar-winning people involved in the technical aspects of the movie all went away because of little old me. I think that's another reason why I was harassed too, to be honest with you, because I killed the movie. But
it shows the industry, the public interest, and still the ongoing manipulation of facts, disinfo, misinfo, depending upon whose version of events. But it all goes back to like this whole thing in '63 and the provable things that happened. It's really
and it was another thing, to the interest of time, I'll tell you another major discovery of mine, a couple of them, in addition to the death of Shipman, and agents weren't called off the car, and the bubble top wasn't taken down, by Kennedy and the motorcycles. The other thing was that building rooftops were normally guarded through FDR, Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy days. Most people think, oh, that was probably a reaction to the assassination. They started to guard rooftops, right? Wrong answer. Again, speaking of that Tampa trip, 28 miles long, Kennedy's longest domestic motorcade, 3 times as long as the Dallas motorcade. All multi-story building rooftops were guarded by the sheriff's department with long guns and Thompson submachine guns. And not only was that in documents that were released in the late 1990s, only in the late 1990s, thanks to the ARRB. But when I spoke to Russell Groover, I mentioned him earlier, who was the lead motorcycle officer in Tampa, I said, oh, they couldn't have got Kennedy in Tampa. No Oswald, no conspiracy, nothing. Every window was watched from the ground by military police, and in any building that was above a ranch-style dwelling, all the multi-story buildings, rooftops were guarded. And then you see the film, and they're flying at a fast rate of speed. Agents are still on the back of a car. There's a phalanx of motorcycles, like 6 to 9 on each side, closer to 9 on each side. And they had 6 pages of threats to Kennedy's life in Tampa. He gets to Dallas, the city he was warned about, the city that JFK himself said, we're heading to nut country now. They find nothing. And they had no resources to guard building rooftops when it was so much easier compared to Tampa. And here's the other thing. It's on my YouTube channel several times. In fact, that day, I discovered this during the COVID lockdown. One of the biggest discoveries I found was this gentleman, his YouTube channel went down, but he sent this to me. He's like, oh, my God, thank you, sir. And what it is ABC's Ron Gardner. Kennedy's not dead yet. And Ron Gardner is telling multi-millions of people around the world, simulcast, that something like this shouldn't have happened. Building rooftops are normally guarded as they've been for other presidents in the past. And, they do this to watch out for troublemakers. He's going on and on about building rooftops being guarded. This precious piece of video. Thank God the gentleman sent to me. Again, it was during the COVID lockdown. His whole channel went down due to copyright concerns because he had a whole bunch of network videos that must have been pirated or whatnot. But the important thing, I got a hold of this corroborates all my other research. I got backed up 2 major Secret Service books written before the assassination, talk about building rooftops were guarded. Other trips, we went to Nashville, all the building rooftops. In fact, there's an article I reprint when Kennedy went to Paris, 10,000 police were on all the rooftops. So that's how they got around not having a police state. Now, to be fair, the security back then was not like it is in 2025. I understand that. But for the times, the 50s and 60s, whatnot, the security was great. There's a reason why presidents lived. They had many security men in the crowds themselves, facing the crowds. They also had, again, agents on and near the back of the car, many motorcycles, the top off front.
All the windows closed, like Fletcher
Windows
Prudy
closed.
made that
Yeah,
statement.
Fletcher Prouty's been vindicated, William, because for a long time there was a movement to try to debunk him when he passed. And they said, "Oh, that's hogwash." And turned out, yes, there's a Secret Service manual. There's absolutely no question there's a Secret Service manual. Chief Inspector Michael Trina, who I spoke to, wrote the Secret Service manual. This is documented in a 1960 book talking about how he wrote the Secret Service manual. When I spoke to him, he corroborated the fact the multi-story building rooftops were guarded for presidents. He wrote about it in a 1962 book written a year before the assassination. But more importantly about Prouty's thing, because some people tried to say, oh, that was an isolated incident in Mexico for Eisenhower. He's full of it. No, he's not. Because, again, it's the documentary record, it's newspaper archives, it's even photos sometimes. You can see the men on there. In fact, when Kennedy came to my own town of Pittsburgh, PA in October 62, there's actually a Getty Images photo of the police on rooftops during his motorcade. And there was an article came out on the day of the assassination. The Pittsburgh police talking about something I guess wouldn't have happened here. We had all the building rooftops guarded. We had the windows. If anybody even would have opened a window, he would have been shot. Again, this is for the time. This isn't afterwards. This is contemporary news articles. But it took years to ferret this stuff out. That's why I tell people, was this little old me in the wilderness who had the balls, whatnot, to call these guys, spend the money in newspapers.com, ferret out photos and films, whatnot. It took years to do this, so it was on my own dime. I work for a living. That's another thing I hate when people say we're in for the money, huh? I work full time. I'm broken even. I'm not in this for the people that make the money are the Clint Hills, the Gerald Blaines, the Gerald Posners.
Posner's still out there. He's still out there disputing the JFK files, and for me, you can find a bigger question mark is a nice way to put it.
That's a very nice way to put it. Yeah. Well, even for his book Case Closed, briefly, he gives the impression that he spoke to Secret Service agents. He spoke to one, actually spoke to two. He spoke to Floyd Boring, who told him nothing and gave him Hamilton Brown's number. Hamilton Brown is the executive secretary of the former Agents Association, and he basically told him to fly a kite, and he's not giving any information. But if you look at the back of Gerald Posner's book, he gives the impression that, I spoke to the former Agents Association member, but he gave him no info. But the world doesn't know that. It took little old me to find out, like, oh my God, Hamilton Brown didn't even cooperate with him. But it gave that impression that he spoke to former agents evidently because he, so I mean, that's how they get away with stuff. That's how, in the media, the major, newspapers, outlets, whatnot, they don't question things, especially if it's the Oswald didn't get a life angle, so.
You don't see the sub rosa stuff, the connections. You don't know who's financing these books. So many of these books we found out have been financed by sus characters, and that's intentional. Bugliosi, Case Closed or whatever he wrote. I don't know what he wrote, but it's
no, you're right. And then also, like, even though I was mentioned earlier about Gerald Blaine was an obscure agent known by maybe 0.0001 of the entire world, one of them being me because I'm into the Secret Service. This guy was a first-time author. He comes out on Simon and Schuster. He gets a major media play. He gets a major documentary on Discovery Channel. He came this close to getting a Hollywood movie, and the guy never published anything. But you know what it was? They basically were scared. They saw my 22-page letter to Clint Hill. He did, because he was quoting from it, and it was an unpublished letter, a private letter. And they were both angry at me and talk about, C-SPAN, the two of them. And they realized that, hey, this guy's all over the internet. And they were terrified when they found out my first book was coming out. Basically, we got to squelch this. We got to come on. We got to, defend our position. But here's the funny thing about Gerald Blaine, not to be confused with Gerald Bain of, number one agent. Gerald Blaine, when I spoke to him in 2004, he joined the course, William. He was one of the many agents who told me that President Kennedy never interfered with us. And Clint Hill famously says that he never heard Kennedy say anything. It only came from Floyd Boring. Like, he never heard Kennedy say, get us off the car. He wasn't even in Tampa. It all came secondhand. And then when you realize the source, Floyd Boring, is adamant, thank God I got him on audio tape, several of them, he's adamant to me, he's even in a letter, saying President Kennedy was very cooperative with the Secret Service and never ordered us off the car. They don't realize that this is going against official history, but, no one had any reason to question it. It was a fluky thing, how this all came about. It was just a total fluke. I flew in blind. I had no agenda. Like, people were like, I have a theory. I'm going to fit my theory. No, I didn't. I just called these gentlemen because I was fascinated. If they would have told me something else, there would be no books. It'd just be like, well, it's time to get on.
Right. There would be a contradiction to do this. And that probably a lot of the JFK books themselves or all these other researchers wouldn't be doing it if there was obviously contradictions, like in a court case. Why are these two different stories? Just
Yes.
like cops talking to perpetrators, if they have different stories, what's going on? And that's a tell in itself.
Yes.
But we are at the 55-minute mark. Vince, where can people find your book, and where can people find you?
Yeah. Again, Vince Palamara, my YouTube channel comes up. Just Google my name, Amazon, my 7 books coming out. They're all out now, including the latest one, Predication to Survive Dallas. So basically, Google my name and everything comes up. YouTube channel, the books, my blog comes up at the end of the first page and all that. So it's
yeah. There's a lot there. I mean, and you summarize like how much is at stake with Kennedy's death. Like the whole history changed for the worst.
Yes.
And
all the presidents. There's a domino effect. Well, just briefly, you figure if it wasn't for Kennedy's death, not only wouldn't you have the Vietnam War, there would be no LBJ, no Nixon, no Ford, no Carter, because he was a reaction to the Nixon-Ford days, no Reagan. So it just, even we won't even go past that. And then Watergate and everything else, you wouldn't have had all that if it wasn't fair. I wouldn't say it was utopia if he would have lived. I'm not trying to be silly, but I think it would have been a much better world. And he was looking to not get involved in the conflict in Vietnam. Wasn't going to be boots on the ground in Vietnam. He had so much at stake with Kennedy's death. And that's why, we had 2 Luna hearings, all the file releases. Abraham Bolden, former Secret Service agent I spoke to many times, he was there at the hearings. And, thank God there's still current interest in it,
Yeah, and he got the works. Like his life was basically ruined for the Chicago situation. They supposedly were trying to kill Kennedy in Tampa, then Chicago, which Kennedy didn't go to.
Yes.
And then
Plot to Kill President Kennedy in Chicago is my prior book, and it details other trips too. And basically, yes, it was a moving crime. You want my learned opinion? Yeah, they definitely were going to try to kill him in Chicago in early November '63, and 4 days before in Miami. He went to Miami and Tampa.
Miami, that's right. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. Yeah, that's good.
I said Tampa, but I meant.
Well, no, you're actually not off one, because I mentioned earlier about 5-10 minutes ago there was 6 pages of threats they found, 6 pages of names of people that wanted Kennedy dead. Again, contrast with Dallas, and he found nothing. Even Roy Kellerman, the Warren Commission, thought that was unusual. I'd say it's pretty unusual when Kennedy himself is saying we're heading to nut country now. They find nobody who wishes ill on the president. That's very hard to believe.
It's strange. Thought is strange. High strangeness in the Kennedy assassination. So many deaths before. The shipment before is interesting.
Yes.
But that is also very sus, like a Secret Service dying. You would think you would have died of like a car crash or something. Not a heart. The least likely person to have a heart attack.
And 2 days later, buried, no toxicology tests. Like 2 days later?
Yeah. That's a true DC type homicide where they just put you right in the ground. Yep. Again, Vincent Palamara, Palamara. And the full title of his new book is President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas, the Secret Service and the JFK Assassination. And this is the 7th book. So I'll put links to his YouTube channel and his Amazon page so you can check out his other books. But thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks a lot, Juan. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.
All right, stay there.